With just hours to go before marijuana is legal across this country, the final legislative hurdle has been cleared for BC's one and so far only officially approved pot shop.
Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Contrary-minded, that is carried unanimously, and history has been made.
Kamloops City Council granted the store's cannabis sales license in a unanimous vote this afternoon. The province gave its approval for the shop back in September.
We are prepared. We're open for business in Kamloops, and insofar as cannabis retail, I think it's a anomaly right now about being the first, but this time next year we'll wonder what all the fuss was about, because I'm sure there'll be cannabis retail all over Kamloops and all over British Columbia.
The city's report says the aptly named BC Cannabis store has met all zoning requirements. It's at Columbia Place Shopping Centre. It will be open at 10 a.m. tomorrow morning. Kamloops Mayor expects council will grant as many as 15 cannabis licenses throughout the city. As the law changes tomorrow, new licensed stores will open up across this country. But there are lots of uncertainties about what happens to dispensaries already in business. That lack of clarity has led to some unusual sales. Bill Puri has that part of the story.
It's a clearance sale unlike any other. This marijuana dispensary wants to get rid of as much stock as possible.
What we're doing is our blowout sale. I think we're doing up to 50% off on everything in the store.
What may seem ironic on the eve of cannabis legalization is actually a strategic move. The owners have applied for provincial licenses under the new regulations and don't want to take a chance of running afoul of the law.
We don't want to stay open, knowing that the province has stated that in order for us to remain legally open, we need to have both provincial and municipal license.
Eggs Canna is one of dozens of dispensaries in Vancouver that has been selling marijuana, oils and edibles for some time. Until now, though, they've only needed a municipal license to do business.
That is a $30,000 license that we pay yearly. We've paid it 2 years running. And even though we've paid that license and we're out that money, we still need to close down in order for us to get provincial licensing.
The operators have provincial license applications in the works for 3 stores in Vancouver and another 5 in surrounding municipalities. The provincial government has received 173 applications to open new legal pot shops in BC.
We would like to be a part of the legal landscape, and what that looks like for us is to comply with what the province has asked of us, which is to close our doors.
The Cannabis Products Outlet hopes to have its first new store open in 8 weeks. But not all Vancouver pot shops will close in time for the new rules. Many dispensaries plan to continue operating even without the proper paperwork. But it's unlikely anyone will rush to shut them down. Officials have indicated they will take a measured approach in policing the new cannabis environment. Belle Puri, CBC News, Vancouver.
So once cannabis is legal as of midnight, what if you want to travel with it? What exactly are the rules and the cautions? Tina Lovegreen now with what you need to know.
Passengers rolling through YVR tomorrow will be allowed to bring cannabis with them, but there are several important points high-flying customers need to know about. First, in BC, you have to be over the age of 19 to possess or consume pot, and you can only have 30 grams of dried cannabis on you. And in case you were wondering, this is what 30 grams roughly looks like. And if you're packing cannabis oil, it has to be 100 milliliters, same as other liquids, aerosols, and gels, and it should be placed in the same 1-liter clear plastic bag. Second, you have to be traveling within Canada, and even then, things can get hazy because every province has its own rules.
In terms of how they're interpreting the rules and regulations and how they're applying them to their province. So please make sure to check with the province, the destination that you're going to, before you in fact travel domestically.
And if you're traveling internationally, just leave your pot at home.
Do not travel internationally with cannabis because you will not be admitted into the country that you're going, whether that's U.S. pre-clearance here or at the other end of your 14-hour flight when you get into Hong Kong.
This goes for crossing the U.S. border by car too. Even though cannabis is legal in some states, it's illegal under federal law to possess it in any form or quantity, and the penalties include legal prosecution, fines, or even jail time. Yes, it can all get a little confusing, which is why airports want passengers to do their homework and ask questions before taking flight. On Thursday, Victoria International Airport had RCMP officers and staff breaking down the rules. and they suggest a simple solution to stay out of trouble.
Should your plane get diverted due to weather or engine malfunction or what have you, you could end up in a place where it is illegal. So if you can avoid traveling with it, that's my best suggestion.
And if you're looking to toke before your flight at YVR, the rules are the same as for tobacco, only in designated areas on level 1 and 3. Tina Lovegreen, CBC News, Vancouver.
Now, health officials here in Vancouver are warning drug users to be careful after a synthetic cannabinoid was detected in a fake tablet of Xanax. It's the first time a free drug testing program in the city has found such a substance in that kind of drug. Synthetic cannabinoids have an effect similar to marijuana, but can be much more powerful. That can be dangerous for a user who doesn't realize what they're taking.
People can feel nauseous and sweaty when they take it, but more importantly, they can feel paranoid and get hallucinations and feel really quite uncomfortable. It doesn't usually kill people, but it can make them feel quite unwell.
Health authorities say it's rare to find synthetic cannabinoids in drugs in Vancouver. They're urging anyone using illicit drugs to get them tested at Insight or other overdose prevention sites. And if you're thinking to light up in the great outdoors while camping in a provincial or national park, you can, with some restrictions. Both Parks Canada and BC Parks have given the okay for using cannabis at your own campsite since it's viewed as a temporary home. But smoking pot will not be allowed in common areas like playgrounds and parking lots. BC Parks said some consumption will be allowed on trails as long as it's not in a campground. Now, if you're planning to order pot online, your delivery may get delayed. Canada Post has been given strike notice by its unionized workers. It happened this afternoon. They say they could walk off the job as early as next week. The union representing Canada Post employees say rotating strikes could begin on Monday. They're pushing for improved job security, an end to forced overtime, and better health and safety measures. Locations for the potential strikes have not been announced yet. Welcome back. We have more on one of our top stories now. At midnight tonight, recreational marijuana will be legal in this country. And with just hours to go, the big question is Canada ready? Catherine Cullen looks into that.
I see my friend waving a sign about decriminalizing cannabis. I'll take that as a question.
From back then,
I'm in favor of legalizing it, tax and regulate.
To now, pot stores, some government-run, ready if tomorrow customers are lined up out the door.
For the brand new user, the 70-year-old grandmother who's curious, and we expect some people may come in just to look around.
Tonight, Canada becomes the second and largest country in the world to legalize recreational pot. No one expects the country to suddenly look like this all the time, but the Liberals have made a gamble on legalization, and there will be challenges, with some already casting blame.
They created this mess, and then they want the provinces and the police, and they said, now you guys figure it out.
I think that Premier Ford should be very careful. This is not a partisan issue. Parliament has spoken. The legislation has been passed. This is now a public health issue.
Also a public safety issue, says Ford.
Make no mistake, by rushing legal cannabis out of the door before ensuring police have the tools they need, the Trudeau Liberals are putting people at risk.
Problem is, that's not what police say.
I'm here to tell Canadians that the police are ready.
How are you doing? There are concerns about whether there are enough officers specially trained to catch high drivers, whether the tough new laws to punish them will actually be used, and the Liberals authorized new saliva tests to help detect high drivers, but many forces aren't buying them, citing the cost and questioning how well they'll work in the cold. Still, police don't sound panicked.
We have been dealing with impaired driving by drugs for many, many years.
And what about those with a criminal record for possessing something that's now legal?
We're going to be working on that, as I said, as soon as the day of legalization comes into force.
Tomorrow morning, the government is expected to announce its plans for pardons for Canadians convicted of simple pot possession, as Canada's historic shift from prohibition to legalization sets in. Catherine Cullen, CBC News, Ottawa.
With legalization imminent, workplaces across this country will have to adapt to a new normal, one where staff can legally buy and use cannabis. That raises plenty of questions about the responsibilities of both employers and employees when it comes to ensuring safe workspaces. as well as the consequences when somebody who is impaired by marijuana hurts themselves or someone else on the job. For a closer look on what you need to know about cannabis in the workplace, we're joined by Tom Brocklehurst. He is with WorkSafe BC. Tom, first of all, starting tomorrow, for employers, what do they need to know and do in order to ensure a safe workplace?
Well, first of all, they need to know that they are required to ensure that workers do not show up to work impaired and are not put in positions where, if they have ingested an impairing substance, they're not put in positions where they could potentially harm themselves or others.
What about employees, workers themselves? What do they need to know and do?
Well, workers, to start off with, need to know that they can't show up to work impaired. They need to be fit for work. So they can't have ingested any sort of impairing substance that might put themselves or others at risk. And if they have impaired an impairing substance, if they have ingested an impairing substance, whether that be a recreational substance or something they're taking medically, they do need to let their employers know that. They need to disclose that to their employers. Now, if a worker is injured on the job after ingesting cannabis, what are the consequences for both the employer and the employee? It doesn't really factor into a decision to compensate that worker or not. However, if there is an incident that is caused and impairment is potentially a factor, that is something we would look into as a workplace health and safety regulator, and there are potential consequences to an employer that has permitted that situation to exist. But what about an employee? If the same rule applies that you cannot show up, for example, impaired by alcohol, would that follow that they could face consequences if they show up and are found to have been impaired by cannabis? They could, but typically we look at more directly at the employer having policies, programs, procedures in place to manage impairment at the workplace, to be providing strong supervision and oversight of their workers at the workplace, and to have a good message around not showing up to work impaired. Tom Brocklehurst, we appreciate your time. Thank you very much. Thank you. So marijuana will be legal here in BC in just over 5 hours or so, less across the country. In fact, some people are already lining up in Newfoundland. The rules will differ depending on where you live. CBC Power and Politics host Vashi Kapelos explains.
Pot may be legal come October 17th, but where you live in Canada is going to determine exactly what that means for you. Across the country, the minimum age for buying and consuming marijuana is either 18 or 19, depending on where you live. That could change, though, in Quebec. Its new CAQ government wants to raise the minimum age from 18 to 21. Only 2 governments are completely hands-off sales, Saskatchewan and Manitoba. Private stores will sell marijuana there. In 5 jurisdictions, Quebec, New Brunswick, Nova Scotia, PEI, and Yukon, the provincial government will control all sales. The rest are a mix, usually with private store sales and government-run online sales. A heads up for people living in BC and Ontario, only 1 store will be open in Kamloops, BC on legalization day. And in Ontario, users can only order product online until stores open in April. Now, most provinces say you can light up wherever cigarette smoking is permitted, but certain public spaces where you'd expect to find a lot of kids, like parks and playgrounds, they're prohibited. 4 jurisdictions have chosen to crack down, though, on public use, restricting it to private property and private residences. But if you don't own your home, you may not have any options. For example, in an apartment building, a landlord can forbid a tenant from smoking up. And if you live in a condo, well, condo boards can also pass policies forbidding smoking up, too. The federal government set a limit of 4 plants per household. Most provinces and territories followed that advice, but 2 provinces, Quebec and Manitoba, defied the order and are banning homegrown marijuana.
CBC Power and Politics host Vashi Kapelos. Now, as Vashi mentioned, not all provinces and territories are taking control of sales, but some of those who are still have to figure out how much they want to charge people. And as Scott Peterson tells us, they'll want the price to be competitive enough to draw customers away from the illegal market.
Many of the provinces and territories are going to be setting their price based on what Ottawa determined to be the sweet spot. In order to set an excise tax, Finance Minister Bill Morneau set that sweet spot somewhere between $10 and $12 a gram. Now, Ottawa assumes the base price will be about $8 per gram, and the expectation is another $1 per gram excise tax will be levied, similar to the sin tax on alcohol. Provinces that collect HST and GST would add another $1.17, bringing up the price per gram to a total of $10.17. Using this formula, Ottawa expects to collect about $100 million in its first year, or 25%, leaving 75% for the provinces, which is expected to be about $300 million. Now, while many provinces and territories are still setting their own pricing, many are going to be watching the Nova Scotia Liquor Control Board. It plans to sell 3 varieties. Depending on strength, it'll charge anywhere between $6.33 and $15 per gram. All the provinces and territories are going to be keeping in mind that, according to Statistics Canada, the average Canadian pot smoker paid only $6.79 a gram last year, and the lower the provinces keep that price, the more customers they can attract and the faster they can hope to diminish that black market. Scott Peterson, CBC News, Toronto.
Well, across the country, several independent retailers plan to open at midnight to make their first sales. Government operations will likely wait until regular business hours tomorrow morning to open their doors. Regardless of when sales start, there are already concerns there won't be enough weed to go around. Brett Ruskin explains.
Well, the question of supply is one that was answered by officials here in Nova Scotia. They said that they won't have a quite full selection of cannabis products once the store's doors open tomorrow. Same story in Manitoba as well. Both those provinces have spoken out to say that they've approached producers over the last couple of months, said, listen, this is the volume of products that we're looking for, this is the variety of products that we're looking for, and the producers up until today will not be able to meet that request for all of those products, at least not on the first day. There are a number of producers that say, hey, listen, on the first day, we're not sure we can meet this demand, but however, over the next few weeks, we should be able to catch up to the ongoing steady demand for cannabis. So that's a talk of supply from the perspective of the retailers as well as the producers. As for the federal government, Minister Bill Blair has said that there shouldn't be any problem with supply. Even on day one, he says that they're working with 120 different producers from coast to coast, and that production levels have increased by 600% from last year to this year at this time. He says that they're working with Health Canada to ensure there is adequate supply for everyone who wants to purchase cannabis tomorrow. So overall, we'll have to see exactly how much exactly is available once these doors open here in Halifax, as well as doors opening all across the country tomorrow for the sale of cannabis. Brett Ruskin, CBC News, Halifax.
And some science for you now. There are 2 common terms you've probably heard a lot and ought to know more about. Here's a quick primer on THC and CBD. Both are compounds called cannabinoids, and they can be found in cannabis. The most well-known one is THC. It's what produces the high associated with marijuana. Another acronym you'll often hear is CBD, as we mentioned. It's also a cannabinoid, but it doesn't get you stoned. While THC makes some people feel anxious or paranoid, CBD can help curb those effects. Different strains on marijuana contain different combinations of the two, so users have to figure out which one they want to use.